Steam Next Fest February 2026 just ended about a week ago from the time of this video. And so, of course, in my nerd kind of way, we have gathered up a bunch of data on the top 52 games that gained the most followers during that section of time. And looking at this data, I have 11 takeaways for the indie game market that I thought were interesting. And really, this is to help you guys who have asked me, hey, we have maybe 4 or 5 prototypes that we're working on. What do you think about these games and how they fit into the market? Or maybe you're thinking as a small studio, what kind of game do you want to build next? Or even as a solo dev. But for those of you who's like, indie dev is just an art form to me. It's just an expression, a hobby. Cool, don't worry about this. If you want to watch because you find it interesting, great. But this is no shade to you guys. This isn't to say like you have to build these kinds of games that are doing well. And by the way, I'm going to put timestamps down in the YouTube video, so please skip around to whatever sections you find interesting if you don't want to watch the whole thing. So the way I gathered this sheet was just going to SteamDB, looking at the most wishlisted games for the last 7 days near the end of the festival, taking that snapshot, and then I have them ordered by the most followers, which of course usually means they had the most wish list. You can estimate conservatively. Just multiply these followers by 5, and that may be how many wish lists they got in that last week. Or you can, overestimate a little bit and say, around a 10 times multipliers, some of the more extremes that people have reported on. Of course, I don't know how many wish lists they actually got from the festival itself. These also take into account the marketing they're doing around the event. So look out for how to market a game. I'm sure he'll collect some survey data and get some more concrete numbers of what people actually achieved just from the festival itself. So for example, the winner as far as the most followers was Windrose here, which is an open world survival craft as pirates. I mean, it's no surprise that this kind of game is popping off. A lot of co-op games, a lot of survival games are doing pretty well. And this one looks pretty sweet. I didn't get a chance to play it myself, but immediately I went to my family and was like, hey, this might be one of the next Valheim. This might be our next Enshrouded that we want to play once it comes out. One interesting thing is though that Steam Next Fest does put out, which games were the most demoed plays. And so I wanted to compare that. Okay, does the top followers mean that they also had the most demo plays? And for the most part, kind of. For example, Windrose was the most followers gained, but only the 3rd demo played. Tap Tap Loot was number 3 on the list for the most followers gained and was 23rd among the demo rankings. But if you look at the game itself, it's really not that surprising. It's an idle game. One of those desktop games where as you're doing productive things, it looks like you're gaining items and fighting things as you're typing. Other games were quite further apart, like Darkhaven was the 5th most followers gained, but as far as their demo ranking was the 20th most played demo. So, still pretty good. But obviously they got a lot more followers than actual people playing the demo. And that's pretty common. How to Market a Game has reported on that. When I went through Steam Next Fest back in October with the game I was used to work for, that was kind of the same thing. We got almost 2 times the amount of people who wishlisted inside the festival versus the amount of people who actually got it and played the demo itself. And interestingly, there were some games that gained a lot of followers, like Death Stranding 2, that weren't even in the top demos played for Steam Next Fest, which makes sense. That this is published by PlayStation, so they probably have a lot of marketing efforts going on outside of the festival as well. They're also coming up on the release date soon, so I'm assuming they're doing a lot of marketing, getting a lot of wish lists, and using the festival as just an extra boost for their efforts. So you can go through some of the differences there if you want, but really right now I want to look at some of the interesting trends as far as the top genres. I did my absolute best. I'm probably not the best person to determine a game's genre. And as you guys know, it's a mess these days with lots of games blending genres. So I tried to put them in buckets that weren't just like, hey, here's 52 different buckets and every game has its own bucket. I tried to group them up as best I can, but I'm sure some of you guys can come on here and do a little bit better of a job. But at least, we got enough here to pull some trends out. So one thing that stood out to me was actually how many shooters did well this Steam Next Fest. For as much talk as there is about, open world survival craft games and simulation games and roguelikes that are doing well, we got a lot of shooters out here in the top 10 itself. Marathon and another extraction shooter, this time made by Bungie. We had Far Far West, which is kind of a Western Helldivers as they describe themselves. Aromatis is a roguelike shooter. Even Voidly Bound, I put it as a creature collector, but they mixed it in as a shooter as well. So 4 of the top 11 were actually shooters this Next Fest. Another thing that I thought was interesting is the bottom half of the top 50 had a lot of RPGs. Even if you remove the action RPGs, there's a ton of games in here near the bottom that were single player RPGs or something adjacent like an RTS, a lot of turn-based combat. And while the followers they got were, significantly less than some of the major games, There's a big chunk in here that gained anywhere from, 5 to 20,000 wish lists in Next Fest, being a more strategic single player type game. The other thing I thought interesting was a lot of people talk about how roguelikes have taken over and that's all there is nowadays, it seems like. Well, going through the games and seeing if they have a roguelike aspect to them, I only counted 9 out of the top 52 games having a roguelike element to the game. All right, so popping over to the pivot table, collecting all these genres together. Again, this data isn't huge. There's probably too many buckets. There's not enough games to have some major takeaways, but there's some things I want to talk about that I thought were relatively interesting. Just don't base all of your decisions based off of this such small sample size, please. But again, the top genres in the 52, RPG came at the top, simulation right under, shooter number 3, and open world survival craft at 4. And as I said before, as far as those who were making the most gains, as far as a median, the shooter and open world survival craft genres were typically outgaining some of the other categories like RPG and simulation, even if there was more in the top 52. And then also using Solely Gnome, I tracked their Twitch stats for during the festival and the week prior just to see if those were ramping up into the festival. And no surprise here really, but the first person and third person games and genres that you would typically expect well to do on Twitch did pretty well. Simulation, shooter, open world survival craft. The multiplayer shooter, of course, was Marathon from Bungie. So, of course, I had tons and tons of hours watched on Twitch. Friend Slop, Battle Royale, and roguelike deck builders. Whereas if you look at RPG or strategy, ARPG, tower defense, RTS, really not many streamers or people watching these streams in these genres. Future Luke here, because I forgot when I was talking about genres to say, where is all the horror games and Friend Slop? Out of at least the top 52, there's one Friend Slop game that I considered, and that was Burglin' Gnomes. And there weren't any true horror games. I mean, there was games that had dark themes, but none that I would classify as a pure horror game. Maybe there were others in Nexus and they just didn't make the top 52 cut, but I'm just a little bit surprised with how those genres have been trending that there wasn't that many in the top ranked games. Maybe the horror ones are waiting for spooky season to, do the Steam Nexus in October and release right after that. I don't know. Just thought that was interesting as well. All right. The third takeaway I wanted to look at how important is it to have momentum going into Steam Next Fest and how well that converts into how many wish lists you're going to get. For these games, I looked at how many followers did they have before Next Fest, how were they ramping up into Next Fest, and even were they dropping their demo a little bit early and doing stuff on Twitch before the festival started. So for example, if we look at Winrose, we can come and see their chart here on SteamDB. You can see that, yes, they gained some during Next Fest, obviously, but their big momentum started 2 weeks before the festival, and they almost gained 30,000 followers heading into the festival itself. So, of course, they have all that momentum, all this excitement around this game. So what are people going to do? Well, day 1 of Next Fest and day 2 of Next Fest, they're going to go flock to that game, and that's only going to signal to Steam, hey, this game already has a bunch of momentum coming in, they have a bunch of followers, and I'm assuming a lot of people are playing their demo heading into Steam Next Fest, which if we look at their past 14 days, the festival didn't start until February 23rd. And you can see they had huge tweak peaks. Did I say tweak peaks? They had huge Twitch peaks heading into the festival. Obviously must have dropped their demo a little bit early. And so they're sending out to Steam saying like, hey, algorithm, come on, give us more visibility, please. Even something like Vampire Crawlers, it didn't have a ton of followers before Next Fest, but you can see a week or two before they're building big momentum. Gained about 5,000 followers before the festival even started. Let's see, I don't even remember. Did they stream as well? Okay, so it looks like they didn't start their streams, but it looks like they were doing some sort of marketing beforehand, getting all those followers. Let's take a look at another one, Far Far West. A little bit hard to tell because SteamDB won't let me zoom in on their chart here, but you can see they kind of had lulls in their marketing, big jump up, and then a month before the festival, a little bit of lull, and then a couple weeks beforehand, big ramp up. Same thing on Solely Gnome. Looks like they started some of their Twitch streams before the festival even started and rode that momentum into the festival. And as you can see from the scatter chart, sorry, it's a little bit small, but the games that had massive amount of followers coming into the festival make sense. They had massive upticks in their followers during the festival and probably outside the festival at the same time. And then there's just kind of a smattering here of games that not massive momentum, not a huge following, but enough to get them going into the festival well. So this takes me into my fourth takeaway, coefficients. Basically, what is the relationship? How strong is it? Is it very linear? Is it not at all? Between different categories here on the spreadsheet to 7-day followers gained. So this statistic doesn't mean that there's a proven causation, but there's enough of a relationship to say, this probably does matter. The strongest number you can have is a 1, that's a positive relationship, or a -1, a downward trend, reverse trend, whatever you want to call it. Or if it's really close to 0, it means it didn't really have a relationship. It's too scattered out. It's not really linear at all. So having a good amount of followers before Next Fest did have a pretty decent, 0.68. That means there is a relationship that's moderately strong to how many followers they gained during the festival, or at least during the week of the festival. Interestingly enough, for the demo review, not all games obviously had a separate demo page, but the ones that did, I grabbed their review score near the end of the festival, and it really didn't show that strong of a correlation. Coefficient was only 0.11. So there's games that, Darkhaven and Guardians of the Wild Sky, only a 70% positive rating, but still showed a massive amount of followers. Whereas some of the games that had massive ratings, almost near 100%, didn't gain as many followers. And of course, I think that's probably because it depends a lot more on the popular genres on Steam than it does having a perfect demo. And also, I think a lot of the demos, when I read the reviews, it was like, hey, this is a pretty cool game, even if it had a lower review score, but it just has a lot of bugs and needs some fixing. So I'm going to put it on my wish list still, or follow it still, but hopefully the devs fix this over time before release. Of course, another strong relationship was their Twitch stats, how many hours watched in the last 14 days, how many peak viewers, and how many average channels were all strong indicators that got followers during Steam Next Fest. Now, again, is it causation? Is it just the fact that good games in Next Fest get a lot of followers and therefore a lot of people want to stream it? Is it marketing teams are doing heavy pushes on Twitch and so that gets them more followers during the festival? It probably really is a both and. And if you have the marketing budget to do it, I think it's a no-brainer that we all know that creators and streamers, one of the big pieces to success in marketing your video game. Other than that, I looked at studio size and development years to see if they had a big effect, and really there wasn't much of a correlation at all. Of course, these were just estimates. I asked ChatGPT to do some research for me because I'm in school, I'm looking for jobs right now, unemployed. I don't have enough time to go and try to do research myself. But, it usually gives a decent amount of estimation looking through articles or LinkedIn or whatever. Some of the numbers get a little bit out of hand, but still it's interesting to see, there are some games with a smaller team, a smaller dev cycle like Vampire Crawlers who are up near the top of Next Fest, which I think all that to say is just because you have a big team and working on a game for 5+ years doesn't mean you're going to do well here. And the good news is you guys who are small teams or even solo devs have a shot at releasing a good game and doing well in Next Fest. So for the fifth takeaway, let's talk again about Twitch, just because I think it's an important thing to talk about. This is scatter plot, the more hours they watch versus how many followers they gained. You can see that there's a pretty decent trend. The more a game was streamed, the more a game was watched, the more followers they gained. Again, makes sense. I don't know if I need to sit here arguing too much about the importance of Twitch. The one thing I did thought was pretty interesting is that the average channels for the past 14 days, which again, I did to see how many games were streaming and releasing their demo a little bit before the festival. So the averages are probably going to be a little bit lower because not every game did that. But a lot of games, we're sitting at 0 average channels or 1. Even if you took the week before, maybe they bump up to a 1, 2, or a 3. For all the talk about how big Next Fest is, there's not a massive amount of Twitch streaming going on. Or there is, but streamers are often, from what I've seen, they're like, hey, I'm going to play a demo for 30 minutes, set the timer, go, and then I'm going to move on to the next one. So there's not very big momentums from the festival itself. If you're thinking, oh, I'm going to be in the festival and a bunch of creators, a bunch of streamers are going to play my game, most of them, not really. And the ones that did have some high average channels, that they have the resources. They're probably doing their own marketing beats for that push around Steam Next Fest. It isn't because a bunch of streamers found their game and then they're streaming it all week long. The flip side of that, though, looking at the genres, again, there are games that are still doing well. We're in the top 50 of Steam Next Fest that didn't really have a bunch of hours watched on their game or in their genre at all. So I guess the good news is that to do well in the festival, you don't have to have a huge Twitch following. You don't have to have a huge marketing push. if your game is doing well enough in the Steam algorithm itself. So obviously, again, I do emphasize it is a big deal to do a Twitch push, to do a creator push if you can, if you have the resources. But also if your genre, if that type of marketing maybe doesn't fit for your game as well, not the end of the world for at least doing well in Steam Next Fest. All right, I've been blabbing for a while. Let's take a look at a couple other pivot tables before we close out the video. Just some interesting insights, looking at how many games of the top 52 were self-published versus had a publisher. Pretty close to half. Yes, there was a higher median for those who were self-published to get more followers before and during, but I don't think it's a big enough sample size, and I don't think there's really a causation of like, oh, you're self-published, therefore you're gonna get more followers. Especially when some of the self-published games are Bungie. It's like, okay, it's not the same as 3-person studio self-publishing themselves. But I think the good news is that it does mean you can do well in Steam Next Fest, even if you're self-published and you don't have a publisher. And if you do have a publisher, I think that's still fine. So this doesn't tell me like it's bad to have a publisher. I think it really just depends on each studio's scenario and whether you're self-published or not, as long as you're doing the right kind of marketing, keying in on those right strategies, building up momentum, getting Twitch if you can, heading into the festival with much momentum. And then it doesn't really matter if you're doing that as your own team or if you've hired a publisher. One of the things I did want to talk about was the co-op domination. And I've seen this a lot on social media. It's like, oh my goodness, how many co-op games do we need? When can people just make single player games again? And as far as the total amount of online co-op games, there was 15. There was 5 more that had online PvP. So 20 out of the top 52 games you could go out and play with your friends. So really there is a lot of single player games, but the ones that are garnering the most attention are the ones that you're going to be able to play with friends. It's the open world survival games. You know, it's Marathon, the extraction shooter. Even ARPG games like Darkhaven are adding online PvP and co-op. So out of the top 10 games, Vampire Crawlers is the only one, plus Death Stranding, I guess that's 2 out of the top 10 that were not online PvP or online co-op. And so as I've thought about that, I think the reason why co-op games are doing so well right now, there's a few reasons. One, each generation gaming is getting more accessible. There's more gamers. We're breaking demographics. We're breaking, gender stereotypes or whatever you want to call it. And so more and more people are having access to gaming, wanting to play games and wanting to play games with their friends. This is just anecdotal evidence, but me and my wife and all of her siblings are now playing video games together, where 3 or 4 years ago, half the family never played video games or like at most played like Mario Kart growing up at parties. And now we're all, all of us have PC or gaming laptops. We're playing co-op games. We're playing survival games. We're playing Valorant together. And I think more and more people are using it as a way for social connection. Then secondly, I think on social media, one of the biggest things is watch time and then shares. Those are the signals, big signals to the algorithms on social media. Push this piece of content more and more. And you can see that a lot. A lot of the co-op games have a lot better chance of going viral on TikTok in the research that I did a couple months ago on my YouTube channel. And I think third, if you're looking at streamers, well, they want to make the content that is viral. They want to make the content that a lot of people are coming to their stream. And that's typically by teaming up with other streamers now and creating this either co-op or PvP type of content. So there's probably other reasons why co-op seems to be the biggest right now, but that's at least some of my theories as I've thought about it. The interesting thing is that the amount of gains that a game made, if they had co-op or not co-op, were about the same. If they had co-op, they had more followers. But again, that was mostly because they also had more followers heading into the festival. They had more momentum. So it's not that single player games can't do well in Next Fest. It's just like, it seems like co-op games have this bigger multiplier, a bigger market share, which allows them to get more and more followers because more and more people are hungry for that kind of game right now. So it's not that co-op is taking over the world and there's only co-op games. I just think there's a big audience right now, and it makes sense why a lot of studios are pivoting to make these kinds of co-op games. Also, again, the amount of hours watched for co-op games, I would say that's a pretty big number, even in the sample size, to show a lot of people want to stream these types of games. My number 8 takeaway was online PvP. There was only actually 5 games that featured online PvP. Some of them from big studios, again, like Bungie. And so while co-op is pretty strong, I do think there's a pretty big risk focusing too heavy into the multiplayer PvP, especially if it's more competitive PvP. I think Marathon, is jumping on the extraction shooter hype train right now. So it's like you have PvP, but you also have PvE. So it still doesn't give me great hope for specifically online competitive PvP games to do well in Next Fest, even though there is a decent audience, obviously, for things like CSGO, things like Deadlock. I just think it's obviously very, very hard to compete in those types of genres. So if you're a smaller to medium studio trying to tackle that, good luck to you. Tell me if you figure out how to do it well. Number 9 is studio size. This was a grouping I did. Again, this is just GBT estimations. So if it was, very small, that's 5 solo dev. If it's 10 or less small, medium is 10 to 20, and then anything over that, I said large. So feel free to disagree with those groupings if you want. But again, this is just for funsies to get some insight to this. And really based on this small sample size, I wouldn't say there was a huge difference one way or the other, except for solo. I think they had a smaller amount of followers throughout the festival compared to the other 4 groupings, which makes sense. It's hard to make as big or as an attractive game as a solo dev. You have less resources to spend, but it's good to see some of you guys out there still attempting and still making it into the top 52 games of Next Fest. Pretty damn awesome. You can see that technically medium teams had the biggest numbers, had the biggest gains, but again, they're all so close. It's not a big enough sample size. I'm not going to take away and say, oh, the best team to have right now is a team size of 10 to 20. I think that's probably irrelevant and just happenstance in this kind of data right now. Number 10 takeaway was development years. Again, not a huge sample size, not enough to really make big takeaways. I think obviously those who had 4 years or 5 years plus had more followers heading into Next Fest. Makes sense. They had more time, more resources to build a community, to build followers as they're developing their game. They did come out with more followers throughout the festival as well, but it wasn't like a massive, massive amount. I would still say those, again, that only were in development for a year or 2 years, had much quicker dev cycles, still did pretty well. I think it shows that you don't have to have a massive dev cycle to succeed anymore, at least in indie gaming. And my last quick takeaway here is just the camera angles on these games. I thought it was interesting. 12 of the top 13 were either first-person or third-person games. The isometric top-down side scrollers, they are on here, obviously. But as far as the top of the top, the cream of the crop, as far as followers gained during the Next Fest week, third-person, first-person, those tend to be the biggest genres, like shooters, open-world survival games. They typically have the most Twitch watching, Twitch followers, Twitch streamers. I'm not saying you have to make a first person or third person game. I just thought that was a little interesting tidbit that those typically rose to the top over some of those other types of camera angles. Well, that's going to wrap it up for now. I was going to go over some of my top favorite picks that I wish listed, but this thing's already so long. If you want to go look at the page itself, it's these ones that I highlighted in a little orange color that I thought were a little interesting, and maybe that's a different video I could do my top picks from Next Fest or something like that. But for now, thank you so much for watching. I am curious for those that watch all the way, which is crazy. I had a couple of people ask, hey, do you have a Discord? I don't right now. I have my Discord. You can contact me in my YouTube bio. But I'm curious if people did want a Discord. There's already some great marketing ones out there, like How to Market a Game has a Discord. There's a couple other ones that I'm a part of. But if people want, just like, I can make a basic Discord if people want to get a hold of me and that's easier for them. I'm happy to do something like that. It'll be very basic and plain. But I'm curious if more people want to do that. Of course, again, I will try to put the sheet into the comments and remember that. And if some of you guys have some better insights, better analytical mind, know more than me, I would love to hear what are your takeaways from this data or from this Next Fest in general. Any interesting insights that you saw, or if you were a game that went through Next Fest, how did it go for you? Would love to hear your story, would love to hear your results, even if you're not in the top 52. That would be very exciting to hear about. And so wishing you guys all the best in Next Fest, your game launches, all that you guys got going on. Much love, peace. See you guys in the next video.